think differently about how we've been doing this thing this whole time. Take it back to the basics. Think about reciprocal value. It's literally, how can I help you and how can you help me? And you can literally, in the B2B space, use that and leverage that as a legitimate channel for growth, built and based on authentic relationships, genuine connection, and that lasts longer than any type of hockey stick growth.
Welcome to EIR Live, where we dive into the lives and lessons of entrepreneurs in residence. I'm Ilya Tabakh, together with my co-host Terrance, ready to bring you closer to the heartbeat of the innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. Every episode, we explore the real stories behind the ideas, successes, setbacks, and everything in between. For everyone from aspiring EIRs to seasoned pros, EIR Live is your gateway to the depth of the entrepreneurial journey and bringing innovative insights into the broader world. Check out the full details in the episode description, subscribe to stay updated, and join us as we uncover what it takes to transform visions into ventures. Welcome aboard. Let's grow together.
All right, everyone. I'm very, very excited for today's episode with Jeanine Suah, not to be confused with anything else. To be clear, she is the master of community building, community-led growth, and helping people build influence around that. Not only that, she's also a serial entrepreneur, but me giving Jeanine's background wouldn't give it any justice. So Jeanine, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself to the audience, to our guests. Tell them a little bit more about your background, and we're going to dive straight in because I'm ready to get to this conversation with you today.
Let's do it. So my name is Jeanine. In a nutshell, I'm a goal-giving entrepreneur who started out as a founder. Now I currently invest. Had some really fun community-led growth roles along the way at multi-billion-dollar companies. And ultimately, my goal in life is to just forge better connections, more meaningful connections in market, and help B2B companies grow.
Love it. See how clear and concise this is? She's like, let's get to it. I'm ready to get to it. Like, let's dive in a little bit, right? So, on the podcast, we love to dive straight into the entrepreneurial journeys of innovators, entrepreneurs, investors, right? All of which you've played, roles in and still playing a role in today and driving the ecosystem. Can you walk us through your entrepreneurial journey, right? We want to hear the war wounds. We want to hear the successful things and how that led to the things that you're doing now, and we'll bridge you there. Can you start us off there?
So let's take it back to grad school. So did my master's program in applied linguistics, lived in Brazil for a couple years, and that understanding of just community. If ever you've spent time with Brazilians or Caribbeans, my family's Jamaican, it's all community. Everybody's taking care of everybody. It's just this idea that you contribute to the greater whole. And so after grad school, I was like, okay, what is something that I could do next? And so while I was in grad school, I worked at a company called Eddie V's, where I was their lead hostess and marketing assistant and was responsible for helping them execute on these really high-end events. And so my manager from Eddie V's basically called me one day and he's like, look, I'm launching this huge co-working space. It's 30,000 square feet, 5 different floors. Do you want to help me run the events program? And so just in being in the space, I learned a lot about tech. I learned a lot about community as it relates to different ecosystems, and then started building out my own communities because I saw a huge gap in the market. I was like, okay, this is cool, but like nobody looks like me. And essentially what happened was that I dove deeper into the problem and found a solution, which ended up being then the Doyenne Company, which was a platform to help badass women grow, connect, learn how to build their businesses. And eventually we turned that into a co-working space, which was then Think Global. So that's kind of like the entrepreneurial journey. There's obviously more points, but got to keep it cute.
What's awesome, maybe jumping in real quick, tech folks and community, it's sort of an interesting oil and water situation from kind of my experience sometimes. I'd love to sort of get you to spend, a beat or two just telling us what that was like, because the word community is used a lot. And in even your point about, what community looks like in Brazil versus what community might look like in the Midwest in the US or in the South or whatever, right? These are, same word, different experience. I would love to kind of have you talk about what you found out and maybe what you learned in that experience. Because, having kind of a technical background and spending a long time in engineering school, community looked different there than some other places. So I'm just curious, kind of how you experienced that.
So being in this co-working space, which was called Station House, there was essentially like this ecosystem built around it. So it was in downtown St. Pete, 2015, like all these different people are coming in. And then from a higher level community standpoint, you have community development happening and redevelopment from the city perspective and from the municipality perspective. So you have all these different people from all these different backgrounds, meaning professional backgrounds, moving to the city because the economic development is already working on like business attraction. So my first exposure in a co-working space like that was all these different people who had been in Silicon Valley, who had been in New York, who had been just building in this really fancy, cute, chic building, using their office spaces to collaborate and grow their business on a global scale. And so essentially there were these little micro communities within the entire co-working space, and it was really cool to see. But again, given that a lot of these people came from the Valley and came from New York, and they were like, quote unquote, like tech bros, I didn't see a lot of people of color, nor did I see a lot of women. And so that was my first experience of like, okay, what is this startup community thing? And it was also really cool because you also had influence from the city who hosted small events like 1 Million Cups. So it was just a really cool fusion amongst several different communities coming essentially for the same reason.
Yeah, just a little fun side story. I was in the room in early days of Million Cups in Kansas City when it got started at the Kauffman Foundation. So it was really interesting to sort of see that spread to more than 100 cities around the world, and sort of kind of see what that does for a spot, but also kind of what it can do for other places, because I'd traveled to Denver and some other places as well, and kind of visited their Million Cups. And it's just really interesting to see how these things develop, but sort of the overlap of community plus kind of some of those networks. I think we'll probably jump into that theme, but it's a tiny world when you get into sort of EIR networks and kind of how these things work together. So funny to hear, or I guess awesome to hear about Million Cups.
I'm going to build on this because Ilya, you were a scholar in residence. You were in residence, technically, right, with Kauffman, and that exposed you to a bunch. And I want to start to sort of bridge, Jeanine's background into sort of her entrepreneurial phase, how she got started. But she left some things out, people, and I'm not going to let her get away with that. So, talk to me about how the Doyenne Company, right, transformed into later on where I met you during that era of the Find app, right? And then we'll bridge into the XIR thing.
Fair.
So talk to us more about that.
Okay, so here's the story. So the Doyenne became a pop-up concept where we leveraged, we meaning my ex-business partner and I, we leveraged underutilized spaces as like a makeshift co-working space. And so the whole point was, how can we validate this business model of community and monetize this community in order to create a sustainable business? So within 3 months, we grew to 300 members. So we knew that, okay, this is definitely demand. And so what we then decided to do was like, all right, we've got this amazing traction. We've also been going and doing some internal market research. And we knew that in order to grow and scale at the level that we wanted to, we needed to go to a bigger city. And this was in the era of WeWork, y'all, when WeWork was just like, had just received, not just received, but like pre-S1, but post-investment from SoftBank, where they were just popping up, growing at an insane rate. And so we knew that like, okay, to have kind of these roots in the ground, a lot of times you need a physical space. And so we walked our happy behinds to Miami, not walked, but drove probably every week, slept on some couches, but drove back and forth every week to Miami, and eventually launched Think Global in February of 2020. We all know what happened in March. And so essentially, it was one of the hardest experiences of my life. During that process, I was also going through a divorce. And then we eventually had to close the business due to COVID because there was no sustainable way to stay open. And so on the journey to think global, I had met hundreds and hundreds of founders, was providing hundreds of resources for founders. And we essentially created this like digital conference called the Black Female Founder Conference. And we had speakers from JP Morgan, from Meta, from a couple local agencies in Miami. And essentially the gap that I saw, and after collecting data, it was that 86% of our founders felt that they had difficulty with fundraising. And so as we were kind of closing out the business, just because, of course, we had to figure out a more sustainable route to monetization, I wanted to go into tech because I love tech and I love investing. And then my business partner went into another space. And that's kind of how Find was founded. It was like, okay, I have all this data. I know that this is a problem when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to founders even understanding how to get access to resources. Let me create a solution for them that made it a bit more fun, exciting to be able to access that information in the click of a button.
Incredible. And today there's some examples of things like Find in the marketplace right now. So timing means everything, and it'll teach you that on your entrepreneurial journey.
Timing is everything.
For sure.
Everything. I'm always ahead of the game. And that's not a flex. Actually, it is a flex, but it also creates some. I'm a very forward thinker. So I think 10 years into the future. But also what that means is that the market doesn't always adapt and understand what you're doing. And so the platforms that you're talking about today are TikTok for business, are what LinkedIn is now doing with video. But essentially the whole thing was like, how can I create a combination between Netflix and Quibi to create these bite-sized video-based content pieces that you don't have to watch the full thing like YouTube, because it's not based on, duration watched. It's literally based on, okay, I need to get the answer to what is fundraising, what is crowdfunding? And I could query and find a video that explains to me quickly what is crowdfunding.
I just want to jump in and point out a couple things. First of all, I agree aggressively almost that, I tend to sail a little bit ahead of the current epoch also. What's fun is these things come around. And so building sort of that muscle memory and the kind of recognition of kind of what happened before, what was the timing, what was the technology, what was all these things. When it comes back, you have a very different, kind of technique, approach, things that you're looking for. So, it's exciting for me, like to say that, you saw timing's everything, because the timing is going to come back. And I think in many cases for kind of platforms, a lot of that's playing out today. So I'm excited to see kind of what you do with that muscle memory. I think the other thing is just when I did the Kauffman Global Scholar Experience thing, I really dug into kind of communities and got to spend a little bit of time in some interesting ones and sort of sit next to folks that, had been involved in the Cambridge ecosystem and sort of in the Valley and things like that. And kind of listening to them talk about what were the foundational companies, who rolled out of that, how the networks work, that kind of thing. I'm excited to sort of hear about, how your experience went, and then how you have an opportunity to connect with some other folks in other ecosystems, right? Because I did this in the Midwest in the early 2010s, where a lot of the Kansas City, St. Louis, kind of Midwestern cities were kind of wrapping their head around what is community, and what role does the city play, and what role does tech companies play? And different cities had, kind of different pedigrees of core technologies and things like that. So it's really interesting to kind of have those community builders and folks like sit next to each other and talk about what's the same, what's different, what can they learn from each other. And there's a lot of like good insight and translation that I've seen kind of happen in those conversations. And I actually think in the Midwest, there's less of that exchange today than there was in kind of the 2010s. It seems to come in kind of cycles, but I think that conversation is a really powerful thing. So just wanted to call a couple of those things out, because it really kind of resonated with me, because they kind of flash back to me coming out of academia into sort of more of the entrepreneurial world.
Same. And we're even seeing it now, to your point about like being 10 years ahead. Back then, my investors didn't fully understand community. And granted, the business model was crap. Like they're not like VCs are not going to invest in a physical space unless you're a WeWork and you have like the ability to scale at rapid pace. But again, we all know how that went. But I think that we're seeing it now with community-led growth, like B2B community. It's now becoming this like buzzword that everybody's jumping on. And I'm always like, a lot of my colleagues are, you know, amongst ourselves, we're like, yeah, dude, we've only been telling you this for like the last decade. But at the same time, we're humbled because finally the market understands what is truly happening and how it is a legitimate business growth tool. So I hear you on that 1000%.
Something that kind of surprised me in that world is, you know, Terrance and I had both spent a little bit of time in sports. And so in the place where sort of attention becomes and community becomes a currency, it was interesting to see kind of the Andreessen Horowitz folks back a couple influencers several years ago, and sort of live sports and kind of those types of events getting a different role in the attention ecosystem. So I think there are a couple of like little nuggets of, you know, how people are changing their thinking around, you know, attention, connection, place, a couple of these different things. And I think, you know, I saw it play out in the kind of sports and all the things that happen around sports ecosystem. You know, Terrance has probably more background in it than I do, but just a couple trends that may be in parallel with some of the things you're talking about.
No, 100%. And, you know, let's talk about community as currency, you know, on that thread. Let's talk about community as currency and how, you know, Jeanine, the first time you went to go create currency for a fast growing company like Brex as an XIR. Talk to us about, one, it's a layered question. When you first heard about the role as being in residence, like what was your first exposure to that? And two, what led to the opportunity at Brex and what did you do there? Give us that story.
Honestly, it's one of the best stories I have in my life. And I'll lay it up by saying like the fact that I didn't fully know what the position was, but based on the description, I was all in, was just the most beautiful serendipitous moment that I personally have experienced today in my professional life, because it set the tone for everything moving forward. So here's what happened, y'all. Okay, so as I was building Find, I was also building my own personal community, and you know, I had been doing crazy things in Miami ecosystem, just like trying to become the go-to person that founders sought whenever they came to Miami. That was like my goal as we were transitioning out of Think Global, out of Find. So what that meant was, how do I learn how to scale myself? And it was through video. And so, of course, if you haven't noticed by now, I kind of have like ADHD/crazy energy. And so I was able to bottle up all that energy into video and then make myself visible and have people start to talk about it within rooms that I had never even been in. And so what that did was it laid the foundation for me to then get connected to multiple people. And one of the people that I got connected to along the way was Shai Goldman. I don't even remember how I found Shai, but I remember reading something about him having gone to Brazil. And I was like, oh yeah, I need to follow this guy. So I ended up following him. For those of you who don't know Shai Goldman, by the way, he's one of the dopest people I've ever met in my life. And he is one of the oldest community builders in the fintech finance space that is actually really good at what he does. So fast forward, Shai put out a call on social media and was like, hey, I'm coming to Miami. I'm looking for help with this. So what I did, being the super connector in Miami, was I just tagged a girlfriend who I thought would be a great job for the role. Boom, that was done. I DM'd him. I said, hey, this woman is at the Beacon Council. She's amazing. She knows everybody, like consider her. So he's like, great, thanks, blah, blah, blah. So then from there, Shai then maybe 2 weeks later, and at the time I'm still building Find, 2 weeks later, post the role for XIR. And I was like, XIR? I was like, what the hell is an XIR? Like, what is that? And so previously, as I was building, I was like, you know, when you do your why statement as a founder, you're like, okay, what is it that I really want to accomplish in life? And I had laid out 3 specific things. I wanted to create content, I wanted to build community, and I wanted to become a super connector so that I could help more founders get funded. And the first 3 things that I saw on the role, the XIR role, when I clicked was, are you an ex-founder? Are you a community builder? Do you like creating content? Do you want to potentially invest? And I was like, oh my gosh, for the first time, I felt seen, I felt heard. And then, of course, I kept reading, and it was just like the coolest opportunity ever. And so how I then got the opportunity, because I applied randomly, and then how I got the opportunity was Shai had seen my content, and he saw the way that I was connecting with people and building genuine community, and how people actually trusted me. Like, it wasn't about likes with me. It was about how can I empower founders with these resources to help them grow. I was always focused on the problem. And then the thing that kind of teed him up was that I started this segment called VC Word of the Day, where we make VC shit fun. And so again, they were the ideal videos that I foresaw happening. And this was like 3 years ago. And it was the TikTok content, like making VC, translating VC terms in a way that founders could understand. And so, you know, a month later, I had the role, and it completely changed my life from an investing standpoint, from a network standpoint, and just from an ecosystem standpoint. And it's just like something I would never trade anything for that experience ever.
Incredible. When you're talking to a friend or a colleague, how did you describe your job?
Oh my gosh.
At Brex?
So we actually had, the funny thing is I actually had, so I told you as through COVID, I was going through a divorce. And so I actually had brunch. My parents and I had brunch with my ex-parents-in-law because they were in town. And so he asked me, my ex-father-in-law, he was like, all right, sweetheart, well, tell me what you're working on right now, because every time you explain it to me, I still don't get it. And so it's like, the way that I say it is I build relationships and I help businesses make a ton of money by helping to connect people to resources and people to people. And I hope that that's a way that they can understand. And then they're like, yeah, but I see you doing these videos. And I'm like, yeah, that's my way of building relationships with people. Oh, excuse me. And attracting them to me. So that's how I try to explain it.
A term that comes up a lot in sort of entrepreneur in residence, at least, is this kind of role of translating. So it's sort of, it sounds like your superpower, and you know, if I had to kind of looking at your background and chatting with you for a little while, is kind of communication, connecting, really thinking about how these connections actually create value, you know, kind of greater than the sum of their parts a little bit. And I think that there's a lot of kind of value in making that relevant for folks with other backgrounds, right? With whether it's a technical background or finance background, folks look at the world in a different way. And so I found kind of and Terrance and I have talked a lot about on this topic, as kind of that translation role and making things relevant. You know, and when we were kind of getting ready for this episode, I kind of noticed the linguistics translation background, and you know, there's probably some interesting transfer from there as well. But that's one thing I found kind of useful and helpful when trying to explain, you know, why am I in residence and why is that useful to the residents, right? As opposed to why am I not in the wild? You know, why would I choose this? And so it's kind of that's a topic Terrance and I have dug into on a couple episodes now.
It's incredibly like that part that you just said about making information relevant. That's where I feel a lot of people either, one, don't fully understand how a linguistics background could even be applicable to the B2B space. And two, where a lot of sales teams and just B2B companies get it wrong in general. Like, nobody cares if you build the fastest UI in the industry because we offer like features and like nobody cares. How are you going to make my life easier? How are you going to save me time, energy, money? And to be able to translate that in a way that is relevant and culturally relevant, because we have a million memes and gifts and all these culturally relevant things going on at the same time. Like, that's what matters the most. And to be able to translate that, especially as an EIR or an XIR, so that you can actually do the things that you need to do as it relates to the company and the market, it's one of the most important skills that you can have. Like, simplification is an underappreciated skill. Truly, it is. It is.
Now, this is very interesting, because if you were, I want to ask you a question that's a little bit different from what we usually ask, which is, if you were building the XIR, EIR role over at Brex, you know, what would it look like? Would it look very similar to what you were doing? How would you take Shai's sort of brainchild and take it to 2.0, right? And I'm just curious, like, given all you know today, how would you have transformed that opportunity?
Oh my gosh, that's a phenomenal question. How I think is okay, I'll go through what Shai did right, and I'll go through the opportunities 2 years later of what I saw and part of the reason why I left Brex. So what Shai did right was that, one, he hired people who had existing communities. So you didn't need to be this big power influencer. You just needed to have true influence. People who actually trust you, believe you, people who you have a real connection with, because that goes way farther than like, I'm Kylie Jenner posting this and I hope that everyone buys, because now we're seeing the business part of it is just not sustainable. Another thing that he did amazing that I would also tap into is hiring people who are just individually themselves. So looking for people who have a very unique makeup, who may not be the traditional 10 years in finance roles for a fintech. And then also hiring people who understand how to create content in a way that is most authentic to them. So off rip, those are the things that I would keep. To take it to the next level, where we really leverage was like events as a go-to-market strategy. I would double down on the content piece and the URL, like the online community building piece, because what that did is it empowered me through my content to build up a credible brand to then be able to be recognized worldwide, so that when I go to Brazil and I'm hosting our first international event, I can leverage my track record that's already displayed to be able to get into doors that I may not have gotten into, which again increases a distribution channel and just widens a growth channel for the individual themselves. So that's where I would kind of do the 2.0 is like, we focused a lot on IRL, which is important because that was part of our strategy at the time, because it was kind of post-COVID. People were still getting comfortable. But where I would now take it a step further is focusing on these subject matter experts and putting out value forward content, not just like clickbait stuff, like true value forward content, and doubling down on that piece, which is part of the reason why I left Brex, because I was like, I want to focus all my energy into understanding how to leverage content as a legitimate growth channel.
I'm sort of a convert to this conversation in some ways, because I really, as I, kind of was transitioning from the first chapter of my career in academia to sort of being an entrepreneur in the wild, through those entrepreneurial experiences, I built a really deep kind of first person appreciation for a lot of the things you're talking about. And also in the kind of the tail end of my kind of PhD studies, there's a lot of focus on communicating kind of deep and complex scientific stuff just to general public and explaining why it's relevant and connected. And I don't know if I had like an awakening, a moment of clarity or something like that. But I always, it definitely wasn't anything like that. I wake up and I could see it wasn't like that. But what was interesting was that kind of looking back, there was a lot of things I was pretty kind of negative or, would filter out about, because I'm like, that doesn't matter. Right. And then thinking about how do you help other folks make it relevant to them with like a tech or a science background or things like that, it is something that, I always think about. And so I'm curious if you've seen any, sort of levers to help folks, kind of realize that for themselves. Because I think that's ultimately the real unlock, is helping folks understand how it's relevant and really kind of walk on their own journey.
1000%. And that is a conversation. I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was with an academic who understood, like you and I, how to write like academic papers with all this crazy jargon, which goes back to why I created VC Word of the Day. And so where I think, as I was learning, for the last 8 months, because I went on the content side and I did some discovery, where I think that the opportunity lies is for these subject matter experts who think about the world differently to break down these technical ideologies in the fintech space, in the legal space, like the typical boring industries. The opportunity is just so clear to me. It's like, you can do so much and reach so many people by just breaking things down in a funny, entertaining, yet edutainment-based way. And I'm helping a huge fintech right now, like break into the US. And that's part of my strategy. And the marketing, the CMO, he's like already sees the vision and he gets it. But at the same time, when you're working with brand teams who are used to doing things a certain way, it also creates some friction. And so my way, which I'll kind of wrap up the thought now, but my way of being able to help B2B teams see the value is by one, building in public, which I'll be doing as I'm like talking about community while I'm building a community and showing people how to do it. And then the second thing is just literally just talking about it in a way that people can understand so that they can then not follow what I do, but more so I can empower them with the information to teach them how to think about it, which again, it's just like an untapped opportunity because you have influencers and then you have like subject matter experts. And if the two could just merge, which they are, but if there's a perfect fusion, B2B companies would go crazy. But it's again, you have to convince them. You have to convince them.
I really like this discussion around like empowering people with information, and it speaks to impact. And for me, impact speaks to hustling for your last name and not your first, right? Because it's all about legacy building. And when we wanted you on the show, right, we knew the value was there. We wanted to bring some value to do, but it's mostly because you were impacting people's journeys, right? And for me, that's legacy, right? Right. Empowering people with information and, thinking about legacy, thinking about the businesses you've built and communities you've built around the globe, not just in the US market. So I can be clear, tell us how being your authentic self, has led to, telling the right strategic stories and helping founders build community-led businesses.
Wow. No, this is a really intentional question. So I used to have, when we started the Doyenne, my business partner and I were a good match because we both were just like wild and crazy energy. So much so to the point where when we first got started, and this is like, again, 2016, 2017, more so 2017, 2018, when LinkedIn was still really buttoned up. And so we would always kind of post these just like crazy, not over the top, but just showing who we were on LinkedIn. And I would get messages from people, from friends who were like concerned, saying like, hey, that's really unprofessional on LinkedIn. Like, hey, that's really this, or you should reconsider this. And for a while, I second guessed it. But then my membership base grew. And I was like, okay, something there. And then I started seeing it more and more. And the catalyst through all of this was when, through COVID, I'll never forget this. It was September 1st. It's August 31st. I had come back from the building, again, going through the divorce. So I was just in a crazy mind space. My hair got tangled up in my braids, and I had to basically cut off all my hair that night. And the next day I decided, I was like, okay, Jay, like we have an opportunity here. I went into work, I went into the building, but we were still shut down because it was August, September. I went into the building and I was like, okay, we have a choice here. We can either hide in the cap that we brought, or we can put on this yellow dress that you brought and tell your story in front of the world. And so that's what I did. And it was a 10-minute story that I just recorded. I told everybody what had been happening, and then I had to cut my hair, and that I was going through the divorce and all these crazy things. And from that moment, I fully understood what it meant to be vulnerable. And that's when everything shifted for me. Business, personal life, opportunities just started pouring in because people understood who I was, and they understood like a deeper side of me and the fact that I was just human. So I give you that very long story to show you why I show up the way that I do, because in terms of legacy, it truly isn't just about me. And it's hard to see sometimes because of like, oh yeah, I want the success and I want the recognition and I want this and I want that. But showing up as my true self, even when I got my face punched in multiple times, helped other people in my community exist better. And that's the joy that I got from being in those spaces. That's why I do it. So that was a very long-winded way of sharing about legacy and why showing up as my authentic self and not just like be your authentic self. Like, but as my true, real self is just so incredibly important to me. So important.
This is kind of crazy. I've never really thought about this until I kind of hear you talking about vulnerability. But in another kind of discussion, and generally one of the best pieces of advice for myself that I try to pull forward is always lean into the things that make you most anxious. Right. And so this is sort of like the other face of that a little bit. And I think actually when you get like a entrepreneur in residence and they have sort of that experience that they're bringing to try to translate into the organization, this is the thing that's actually hardest to translate is the, hey, I have first person muscle memory from the time that whatever that's relevant to the situation happened. And when I say this is the hardest thing I had to do, it sounds like, yeah, that's pretty hard. All right, well, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going to go home now. It's just not the same. It doesn't build the same muscle memory. And sort of the third thing that occurs a little bit to complement all this is, they always talk about in kind of extreme situations, there's growth, right? And sort of, it seems like that vulnerability, plus that adversity and leaning into that adversity, plus sort of learning your capacity and really getting a first person experience is kind of maybe multiple facets of related things. And so as I kind of heard you talking about, I'm curious to your reaction there.
Yes, and yes. And that's why, as you were talking, I was like, wow, like that adversity and then that firsthand experience is why I built Resilient Capital and why I created the thesis. I invest in dangerously resilient founders, building in community, productivity, and connectivity. And it was because of that idea that like some of the best people that I know have had their faces and throats kicked in and who have been able to like bounce back from it. And even if they don't know what to do next, the fact that they got up is game changing, especially as a founder. There have been like, look at the founder of Slack. He wasn't intending to build a two-way communication platform for the fastest growing B2B teams. Nah, he was building a gaming platform, but he kept going. And so that idea of resilience, and especially as an XIR, as an EIR, and being able to even translate what that translates to in terms of skills is game changing, because it's like, all right, cool, we need to pivot our approach. No problem. I've done that literally in my sleep millions of times. So I completely agree with you there.
My goodness, this is I'm having like flashbacks, as I hear you two sort of like have this dialogue, because when my friends, people oftentimes come to me, hey, Terrance, tell me, I'm trying to make a decision on X, Y, and Z. Can you help me, sort of thing, right? And I go to people who help me, right, make decisions. And how I usually make decisions on, if I'm afraid of it, I go to it. That's how I know. If I'm too comfortable, if it's like, oh, go, you're going to go do this thing next, seems cool, but, I'm not like afraid of it. But when somebody presents something to me, like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for that yet, sort of thing, it's like, oh, that's the thing. That's what I need to go and do, right? Because in those moments, you find growth, right? I mean, outsized growth, right? That you just couldn't get anywhere else, because you took the plunge, you took the leap, right? And now you realize that, oh, I'm actually pretty good at this, and I'm not even trying, right? Like, I'm not even trying, and I'm just naturally good at it, right? And I think thinking about how people can be vulnerable and run towards the things that they are afraid of, I think is super important. I got this lesson when I worked for Techstars. Shout out to Neil and Brad at Techstars Chicago, who took a shot on me, right? And taught me really, truly what Give First really meant, right? Taught me truly what storytelling can do for your life and communities, right? And those things, and how vulnerability is a skill of leaders, right? And how you translate that to the future things you're going to do is really the thing that defines you, right? And for me, I'm forever grateful for that lesson. It sounds like we're all forever grateful for the lessons that we've had, along that journey. But I want to ask you another question now. So for founders looking to build community-led businesses, give us a little blueprint, okay? What are some key advice and ingredients that you would give them that they should start to think about, if you had to give them a little framework or something around building in a community-led business and doing it right from the foundation, and not having to go back and try to build community into the thing that you've already built.
Facts. Ooh, there are 3 things that I would say. The first is understand like what exactly you're doing in terms of community and how you want to first approach community, period. There are 2 things that I think about. Are you building a community as a growth tool or a community as a product? And a community as a growth tool is very similar to what we were doing at Brex, where your product exists as its own. And oftentimes like you don't have to monetize the community because your whole goal is to get the community to help build pipeline for the product. And you just build brand affinity along that. Think of it like a Brex, a Notion, a Beehive. And then you have community as a product where it's more like a Hampton or like a Soho House, to where you have to monetize your community. And then you have to, your core value prop is them existing within the community. So if you don't provide the value prop off rip, it's likely that they're going to leave. So that's number 1. You have to understand what it is that you're doing. Number 2, I would even say, maybe even before number 1, it's like understand the intention of why you want to build community. Sometimes people just can throw out community like, oh, let's build a community. And you probably will fail because it's just, you're doing it with no true intention and there's nothing to really keep you rooted and grounded as to why you want to do it. Understanding that why sounds cliche, I promise you, but understanding the why will help you do what I just mentioned, is determine, okay, is this a growth tool or an actual product? And it will also help you keep pushing even when you don't want to do this thing anymore. And then the last thing I would say is build with intention and build with authenticity, right? So it's like you want to show up in a way that people actually want to engage with you. You don't, whether it's as a growth tool or as a product, but you have to attract people to you. And so you need to show up as someone who is authentic, as someone who actually cares about the people that you're serving, because people can smell BS right away. So to kind of bring all the thoughts together, and I'll go backwards. The first one is be authentic. You really need to understand like why your people are going to build, like what it is that you're doing for them, how you want to actually help them add value. Number 2 is build with intention and be very intentional with how you're approaching in terms of remembering your why. Ultimately, what is it that you're trying to accomplish with this community? And then number 3, decide whether you want to grow with or become a community as a growth tool or as a product, because that then determines like all your ops, business model, all the business stuff is determined by those 2 questions.
Love it.
Yeah. We could also talk more all day, but that was the abridged version.
Don't worry, because there's a little bit more. So tell me a little bit more about, you named a few companies just now around, companies that are doing it well, and sort of, the examples between sort of community as a product versus community as another layer. In the last sort of 2 or 3 years, tell us a few examples of companies that you think like they're really doing this right. And companies that you admire who's doing community the right way at this point.
Yeah. I will give all my praise, and you can even make this a clip. I will give all my praise, glory, props, hustle, all the accolades to Beehive. For those of you who don't know, Beehive used to be a consumer platform that helped, newsletters grow, but they have now kind of bridged into the B2B space, and they're powering some of the world's largest newsletters, and they're helping really great writers and really great builders get acquired. They're phenomenal. And I'll break it down like this. With them, it's more horizontal, but it also starts from the top. So Tyler Denk, who's a friend, is one of the most amazing humans that I've ever met, because he's so disciplined and he's so focused on growing Beehive to be a multi-billion-dollar company. What he's done is he's leveraged his own personal brand as a growth channel and has started to build brand affinity through himself individually that has now extended to all his employees are now posting content that's value add, and they're leveraging this like employee-led growth model while simultaneously building out this community that is focused on providing the utmost value to their customers. When you have a company who can basically say one thing and 100 people post about the company without even being prompted, that's when you know that you've built true community. And they have done a remarkable job. And I'm just so to watch that, because Tyler and I met maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago for a Brex event. The way that we met was quite hilarious, but to watch it all happen and then to become an investor who they opened up a community round to, like, that brand affinity, getting your people to literally invest in you and invest in your success along with you, they've just done it right. And I'm not saying that they did it right perfectly or everything was super easy or whatever, but the way that they think about it with intention covered all the boxes that I mentioned earlier.
It's fun to sort of think about. I've traditionally used the word community and ecosystem kind of somewhat interchangeably, maybe in a bit of a flippant way. But every sort of interaction I've had with an ecosystem normally kind of comes back and initially, kind of my thinking about kind of what is an ecosystem, how is it evolving? These things were not transactional, but sort of snapshots, right? I didn't have sort of the benefit of time and a little bit of experience to sort of think about how these things evolve, come back. One example is I was in kind of biofuel and some of the early decarb stuff in like the late 2000s. And I didn't even know that was like an ecosystem of like stakeholders. And before it was commercial, there's a lot of academic, national lab. And I'm, squarely back into it and touched it in some of my entrepreneurial things as well. And it's just interesting thinking about kind of what's the snapshot type engagement and then what's the sort of community to ecosystem frame. This is probably a longer conversation, but it's just like, maybe I need to be tighter with my terms around community ecosystem. Because one of the things I've done is spend a lot of time thinking about, for climate tech, what is the ecosystem? Why do people show up? Especially as you get to like deep tech technology. One of the things that kind of brings me closer to Miami, we've been supporting a little bit of the Climate Ready Tech Hub stuff that's going on in Miami. So that's been kind of an awesome play for Southern Florida. But it's just really thinking about, how that works and then explaining it to my peers, colleagues, other folks that are very clearly connected. I'm just not thinking about it that way. And so I think kind of listening to you talk has encouraged me to get tighter on my terms and maybe think a little bit about, when I say community, what do I mean? And then how does that community or kind of my view of that community connect to sort of that ecosystem context? So I appreciate you being sort of tight and putting a little bit more definition on some of the terms here.
I'm going to add on to that, Ilya, because I struggle with this a lot when people ask me the difference between an ecosystem and a community, right? And I've sort of come to terms to put my own little definition in place, right? I think communities can be vertical or horizontal, right? But I look at an ecosystem as a collection of communities and support. And for me, that's a little different, similar, but adjacent. Jeanine would tell me, yeah, maybe, right?
It's the same.
That's how I'm sort of. So I'm sort of thinking like about, I think about an ecosystem as like a collection, literally of communities and support. Whereas I don't know. I guess a community could be defined that same way, I guess, but like it's a collection of people, right? And things. So
what's the expert
No,
say?
that's a great question. Honestly, Ilya, as you were talking, I was like, I've sometimes used them interchangeably too. It just depends on the context in which they're being used, because different people, back to our understanding, our shared understanding of like language and bilingualism, different people have different understandings of what the terms mean. And to me, I use them interchangeably. Like if I'm talking to an economic development corporation, I'll use community and ecosystem interchangeably. But when I'm talking to B2B folks, it's very rare that I'll use the word ecosystem because I'm not thinking about ecosystem in that framework or that mindset. I'm thinking about the community around the product or the community that's going to then power like whatever we're going to build that then leads up as a pipeline to the product. So to be honest, this is one of those ones where I'm like, I honestly didn't think there was anything wrong with what you were saying because I've done the same thing at the same time. But I think where I really double down on is like the B2B sector's understanding of like community as this general woohoo, like kumbaya term, when I'm like, no, dude, this is like an actual legitimate growth channel. And I need for you to understand that. And that's where I start to get a little saucy, a little spicy, because I feel like I have to defend. I'm like, I literally built, an 8-figure pipeline at a high growth company. And you're telling me that this is just feel good stuff? No, it's not. And so that's where I get a little nuck if you buck, like, because it is a different understanding. But at the same time, those of us who have been kind of in the industry understand that difference. And so linguistically now we have to kind of touch on the nuances, because if we don't, then we can be misunderstood and people just don't fully understand like what we're talking about.
It's very interesting as I hear you go. I can talk to Jeanine for like a whole 2 hours or something,
so
but like
fun.
I'm trying to keep it. I'm trying to keep it together. So I think as you guys are having this conversation, I'm sort of thinking about all the things that you've talked about today on the show, and I'm thinking about how life is a collection of these vulnerable moments, and these things can create this full circle for you, and how things are going. And the thread that I'm thinking about, and I can pull on multiple threads here, but I'm just going to pull on the thread of the Find app, being early, right? Market timing, and how solutions like that exist like that today. TikTok for business, LinkedIn for X, Y, and Z, and how now. Ooh, it's funny how life works. You have your own LinkedIn talk show called About Community. So, talk to me about, you just recently launched this LinkedIn talk show called About Community. And what really inspired this, right? This initiative. And what do you hope the audience is going to take away from this?
Oh my gosh. So I launched About Community because, again, it's one of the first spokes in building an effective community and then leveraging that community either as a product or as a growth channel. It's distribution, it's visibility, it's building authority. And so I have a goal of being the number one resource for B2B content, specifically around community on the internet. And when people Google things about community, I was like, bet I want to be the first thing that shows up, and that takes time. But that's why I launched it. And it was also just like a fun way to get some of the amazing insights of friends, colleagues that are building in these high growth companies and who can leverage their own voices and the platform that I have to inspire and empower other B2B community builders or other people who are thinking about, launching a B2B community and how to do it well. And so that's why I launched it. And it's just been so much fun to start to just jam with people who get it. But then again, to just like you guys have been doing, prompt them with questions that kind of break down the topic so that other B2B companies who are still on the fence about community can understand how to think about it differently.
Fair enough.
It's lit. It's so much fun.
I know. I can tell. I think the true definitions of like finding that thing that you love to do is like you do it for free, but you just happen to get paid to do it. And because we got to pay the bills.
Yes. And likes don't pay the bills. Trust and brand authority do, because that's how you establish yourself in the market. It's so true. Child, it is so true.
Just a follow-up question to that, and I'm going to let Ilya jump in here, is that, how do you see platforms like LinkedIn, right, evolving, right, and fostering sort of meaningful community?
That's a great question. And I kind of have a different take on it than you may think I have.
Okay.
LinkedIn is trying too hard to be something that it's not. And it's focusing too much on engagement and not enough on like building out these genuine connections. And that's a super blanket statement and it's a generalization. But what I'm seeing now are a lot of quote unquote B2B influencers who are taking advantage of the algorithm and they're just posting content that they think is going to sell versus like actually developing these relationships. And I've gotten this feedback from multiple people who have had horrible experiences with people that they think are actually going to help them and they haven't. And some of them have even taken money from people, which again, it can happen anywhere. I will give this like a little sandwich, positive, negative, positive. I started out with the negative piece. I do love the fact that LinkedIn is actually starting to prioritize video and that it's going back to that find vision of like, how can I actually create meaningful content in a short bite-sized piece so that people can understand and learn different skills. I love the fact that they're doing that. But I do see some things. I'm seeing more like engagement farming AI content on LinkedIn, and it's teaching people. But I feel like, again, it's engagement farming. It's not really building out these authentic communities. So I still love LinkedIn. LinkedIn changed my life. So I'm not going to complain because they may want to sponsor About Community one day. I don't know. LinkedIn, love you. But at the same time, like there are certain things where I'm seeing that I don't necessarily love, but I guess that comes down with any product that you've been a long-time user of.
I kind of love it. This has sort of come completely full circle twice. And then, we're now making a sphere. Like one of the questions that we ask always is, what can the EIR live community, kind of the community we're trying to build, do for kind of what you're working on and to support? But what's cool is I think I want to ask it in a little bit of a different way because you're part of this community. This conversation I think is illuminating a lot of really important topics to, other folks that are bringing kind of unique perspective in residence. So maybe instead of just kind of thinking about this one way, what can the EIR live community do? Although I want that to be kind of in the response, it's how do you think about what we should be thinking about for kind of the EIR live community and what that can become? So 2-part question, handle it any way you want. But I just, it occurred to me that this is a question we asked, but we've never asked it like this. So I'm going to shut up and listen now.
That is a phenomenal question. One, I'll answer it. I'll answer the question of how should you be thinking about it. You guys have already done that. I sent T a voice message and I was like, this in and of itself is one of the best presents to help your people kind of create and develop and strengthen their own platform. I have never gotten a thoughtful, intentional gift like this. And this made me, and as I recorded, made me want to create an unboxing video to show my people how to think with intention for their own communities. This type of thing inspires customer love. And this turns people into super fans for you guys. So I would say that you're already doing it. And you're thinking with intention for like how the main kind of question that I always think about is, how can I add the most value to whichever community that I'm serving? And that's what you did it without even realizing that you did it. And now I have a professional microphone for About Community because I was just either too lazy to buy one or I didn't think it was that important, right? So I would say that you guys are already doing it. And I absolutely loved, and I was raving in the voice note that I sent T. So like he can, play it for you, Ilya, if it was saved. But I just thought that was one of the most thoughtful, intentional gifts that I've like ever received. And then I'll actually pause there because I want to just take a moment to like give y'all your props because it was just such a great idea. It was such a great idea.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate that. I mean, coming from the OG of community building and building, community and super fans, like I'll take that endorsement. Everybody, you heard that.
Take it.
We're doing things with intention.
This is like
here.
My version of writing. When I was just getting started in Miami, I used to write everybody handwritten cards and I used to mail it to them. And it was just, and I stopped doing it and I don't know why. And I feel like you inspired me to start that up again for like people who I really appreciate. So y'all may get a handwritten card from me.
Okay. Hey, I'll be checking my mailbox. Okay,
send me the addresses and I will do it because it's this reciprocal value. And to Ilya, to your second question of like, how can the EIR community help me? it's all about thinking about this community thing differently. Like if you can take one thing away from this conversation, it's that. It's like think differently about how we've been doing this thing this whole time. Take it back to the basics. Think about reciprocal value. It's literally, how can I help you and how can you help me? And you can literally, in the B2B space, use that and leverage that as a legitimate channel for growth, built and based on authentic relationships, genuine connection, and that lasts longer than any type of hockey stick growth that you may experience from like a P2P click campaign. I have my qualms about that, but it's thinking differently about it is how people can genuinely help me right now, because then that helps me. It helps make conversations easier when I'm having convos with potential clients.
So take it from tactic to ethos is maybe the way that I would say it. You know, it's one thing for it to be sort of a transactional tactic. It's another thing for it to be sort of a key strategy. It's another thing to be kind of the thing that you are. And so that's maybe that's how I would editorialize what I heard you saying.
I love that.
I'm really going to pull on this thread a little bit more, just because I just have to. I'm itching to like pull on it a little bit more, and it's something that, you know, I really want you to really go, you know, as deep as you want to, Jeanine, and the next question. Because you started to talk about just now, as you were responding to Ilya's question, which was a great question, around sort of, you know, thinking differently, if you will, and approaching the sort of the foundation, the building blocks of what you're doing. Recently, you read a book that you said, you know, changed your life, right? Can you tell our audience what that book was and how it changed your life?
Oh my gosh. The book is The Courage to Be Disliked, and it absolutely opened my mind to the fact that I do not need to be liked by everybody, but the core ethos of what that meant for me gave me the freedom to care less, because I can walk in my purpose more and I can literally do what I need to do without thinking how this is going to affect someone, more so in a negative way, because I'm an overthinker and I have ADHD. So I'll like obsess over these things and like go down these rabbit holes. It's like, it's wild. Thank God I've been working on it more as I, you know, work through the ADHD. But that book legitimately, it just taught me that not everybody has to like you. So you should just have the freedom to move on your own terms, because it's essentially your life. And if you constantly think about, oh, if I did this in this relationship and the way that I said this and that, like some things just aren't your task in life. And if somebody is like super in control all the time, you have to learn to relinquish that control and just let it go. And those few anecdotes it opened my mind up, and it just allowed me to have more peace, because I'm not as focused on what they're doing. I'm focused on what is best for me. And read it, y'all. You need to, not everybody's going to like it. The last thing I'll say.
That's okay.
And exactly. And that's okay. Exactly. But it does talk about trauma from less of a causation perspective and more of like, okay, that's cool, it happened, and that, or maybe that's not cool and that happened, but how are you going to decide to react to it? And it was just, it's an amazing book. It's amazing.
Thank you. Really appreciate you answering that question. Ilya?
Yeah, no, just, it's funny. So, you know, I've talked a lot on this episode about coming from the technical perspective and having my eyes open to other places. One of the pieces that I spent quite a bit of time on is actually human emotion and reaction, because that was my first kind of startup company, is how to capture that. But one of the things I really kind of dove into is that the opposite of happy isn't angry or sad, right? It's no emotion. And so normally when people are emoting, right, that you elicit an emotional reaction, it means that they care about the thing that you're talking about. And so I definitely, you know, hear what you're saying about you don't have to make everybody happy. But remember, when you're making folks react and emote in any way, that means that they're engaged to the things that you're saying. And so in both the how do people react to content and things like that is if they don't emote, right? If there's no emotional reaction, then it doesn't matter. And not to be intentionally, causing kind of reactions or something like that. But just remember that, bad reactions, good reactions, a reaction is a reaction, right? People are reacting because you've hit a nerve, they care, they're engaged. And so that's maybe the other thing I would add there. But yeah, I mean, I've loved like every facet of this conversation. Where probably 15 minutes over where we should be, but I think we've got 45 minutes of value out of it. And so in the tradition of packing and a really good set of insights and conversation, and honestly, just like the back end, this is not the conversation I thought we were going to have. And in the best way, right? And so whenever that happens, and we're like sort of pulling things, weaving things, next thing you know, we got a tapestry by accident. I think that's a good conversation. So
100%.
I loved it, and I appreciated sort of the engagement and really kind of entertaining some of our questions and probably some of the left and right turns that weren't part of the plan, but
that's right.
Reality and the plan are different, and you got to follow the reality. So I'm glad that we were able to put this together.
And that's what being an EIR is all about: going with the flow when you got to go.
Right. We're at time. We want to be respectful of your time, but I'm itching for you to quickly answer this last question. Okay, what is your dream EIR XIR role? If Jeanine could wave a magic wand and decide where she wanted to be an XIR, what would that organization be?
I'm going to answer this with my dream XIR role is to build an XIR program at the next company that I go to. That's all I'm focused on.
Okay.
So, showing them it works and then building out more XIRs, because more divergent thinkers like us who don't have the traditional background deserve an opportunity to play in a space and make their mark. And that's what I'm really laser focused on with this platform about community, is just like open up the door for more people.
Such a privilege today.
Love y'all.
Jeanine Suah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we're keeping with our change in format to kind of doing these reflections and outros. And man, what happened there, right? We started with a conversation around being in residence and kind of this entrepreneur in residence, bringing communities and those topics. Next thing you know, we're talking about linguistics, the sort of intersection of personality traits as it kind of pertains to some important topics. I loved it. I mean, conversations like that are really energizing to me. And what was cool is that we were able to take, some very, very different but complementary perspectives from all of our experiences and sort of weave a tapestry and create, this conversation that really I don't think anybody expected. And so I loved everything about it. There's a lot of like little detail things I can jump into, but I'm just hoping that the audience and folks that are listening will get as much out of the conversation as I did. What do you think, Terrance?
Man, I'm still on a high from the episode. I mean, it was such a really good dialogue, and it was natural as a dialogue, as with other things that we've done. But the energy that Jeanine brings to the show, she has such a rich background around community and really thinking about sort of community as currency, right? I think is a very powerful thing. Thinking about, how vulnerability, right, equals a true leadership trait, an ability to move and influence people through that vulnerability. No better person than the OG Jeanine to talk about that topic and subject. And I really felt like, we had these sort of aha moments throughout the podcast, and these full circle moments, right, that will just make you reflect on how we think about intention, how we think about being our authentic selves and building communities and businesses around those things. And I'm pumped for this episode to come out. And I think that the audience is going to get a lot of value out of a lot of the things that she said. And this is somebody who's walked the path and did it this way. And it doesn't mean that's going to be everybody's path. But man, the authentic dialogue that we had a chance to engage in, I'm still on the high from. What do you think about, like take our community and our ecosystem and our platform to the next level? What do you think about some of the things that you said?
This is sort of this interplay between community ecosystem. You know, I'm still kind of reflecting and digesting how to tighten up the language and what do I mean when I say some of these things. But I think I'm going to be a lot more careful and intentional about how I kind of use some of these words. I mean, I think what's interesting is we're also in a place in the podcast where we can really do sort of the LinkedIn Live and the EIR Live part of the podcast. You know, we the first couple episodes have been out there for a little while. We've got good engagement, some comments. You know, we're changing the format. But I think that kind of the EIR Live and really bringing in the wider audience to be able to interact with some of the knowledge that's there and ultimately connect is pretty excited about. I think the continuation of happy hours and events and things like that. And, you know, we're going to roll into sort of Halloween and the Thanksgiving holiday in the US and generally the winter, which maybe will make it a little harder, but really thinking about where else we can have EIR happy hours and ultimately kind of connect and activate the community. You know, the Atlanta event was really awesome. We were able to have like a pretty good connected group and be able to cover a pretty wide set of topics for, you know, a pretty short period of time. So I'm excited and thinking about, you know, which other communities and as we reach out to folks to be able to support and connect for those conversations. I think that's another opportunity to sort of strengthen and grow the community. And then ultimately, like, there's, you know, in sort of using this interplay between communities and ecosystems, I think the EIR community is really widely connected into a lot of ecosystems. And so thinking about where do these folks get together and can we put the idea and this concept of bringing in a translator, somebody that can be in residence to stretch the capabilities of a industry, of a company. I'm excited about picking that apart a little bit as well. So many different ways we can move.
Plus one, massive plus one. I can't add anything to that because I'm thinking all of the same things. And we've seen the value of, you know, people coming together from different residences and wanting to share successes, wanting to share war stories, wanting to talk about the next thing that they're looking at with a group of people who've been also in residence at other organizations and have different things and tips and tricks to share. And we're incredibly excited about activating that network. And we're looking for you all, the guests and our audience, to also, you know, send us some recommendations of things that you're thinking about, ways that we can continue to build that community, in addition to the ways that Ilya just talked about.
Yeah, and there's a lot of easy ways to do that. Get signed up for the email list on the website, EIR.live. Join and follow the page, EIR Live on LinkedIn. Or if you go to the website or podcast.eir.live, there's a lot of different other places to kind of connect with us. So let's do it. Let's get connected and together, you know, kind of growing and evolving this thing is going to be awesome.
Thanks for joining us on EIR Live. We hope today's episode offered you valuable insights into the entrepreneurial journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and check out the description for more details. Do you have questions or suggestions? Please reach out to us. Connect with us on social media. We really value your input. Catch us next time for more inspiring stories and strategies. Keep pushing boundaries and making your mark on the world. I'm Terrance Suah with my co-host Ilya Tabakh, signing off. Let's keep building.